Okay, I'm ready. Thank you very much. First of all, I would thank Adam for the invitation and all of you for being here. So today I will speak about affective ability in dialogical inquiry. And my aim is to stress the cognitive role of affectivity in cooperative learning environment. In order to do it, in the first part of the talk, I need to frame my account on dialogical inquiry within the model of distributed cognition. I will be a bit in a hurry about it, but I hope to understand you the background of my inquiry. And as a cooperative learning environment, I choose exactly the model of philosophical dialogue as a tool for collective inquiry. And in the second part of the talk, that I think that is the one that may interest you more, I will deal with the contemporary model of Socratic dialogue as a tool for education. My framework came exactly from the German model of Socratic dialogue, but I will explain this later on. So I think that the innovative aspect of my presentation is to stress the cognitive role of affectivity in this particular setting of distributive cognition, but we will discuss it later. And I would also propose the notion of group affective ability, and we will see what you will think about it. Okay, so this is the background. I start with the pioneer paper by Clark and Chalmers, but just to stress how language in extended cognition, distributive cognition, should be understood as a tool of extension. Of course, I don't want to go deep into it here. I can just refer that I'm working mainly in the third wave of distributed cognition, extended cognition, that is the one that has to do with the social extension. So it has to do with the work by Gallagher, Hanne de Jager, etc. Later on, we will have also a slide about the idea of a social parity principle. So the idea that another interlocutor, another social agents can be a tool of the extension. I'm saying this because I would frame my account on dialogical inquiry in a broader coupling, the coupling of the embodied intersubjective interaction. So we don't have only a brain-to-brain coupling, but as it says here, in the face-to-face encounter, we are neither confronted with a mere body nor with a hidden psyche, but with a unified whole. And so here we have the notion of dialogically extending cognition. These notions were proposed in 2013 by Fusaroli et al. I think that is interesting because it stresses how we know dialogically, how our cognition is intersubjective, is dialogically. And they very well stress the inner functional coordination among the speakers within this cognitive environment. So specifically about distributed cognition, I'm interested in this idea that if we take dialogical inquiry as a cognitive system, there is the idea that there are different features that are complementary each other, and thanks to this interaction, they produce a form of knowledge that could not be produced by a single agent, by herself or himself. So there is this idea that a task is attained through this group knowledge, this subject interaction. So this model differs from the most common summative account about groups. So in the dialogical inquiry, I try to understand not just a sum of singular cognitive agents, but exactly to point on the interaction among the agents, so in the constitutive relational aspect of the dialogical inquiry. And thus, as I have already know, this idea of complementarity between dialogical partners, that they are not performing identical functions, so also the role of different function is very important. I think that this has to do also with the idea by Vygotsky that is important in a classroom to have different level of knowledge, because a pupil that is in a lower level in the cooperation with a pupil that in this particular specific moment of his life is in an upper level, can develop the zone of proximal development through the interaction. And so I argue that the inquiring with others permits two things. So from the individual point of view, to develop her skills thanks to the cooperation with the other, and also to the group to be functionally gainful. So we have the subject knowledge and the group knowledge regarding this topic. So this is the social parity principle that I have already introduced, but I would skip this slide. It's provided by Thomas Santo. Okay. So here I'm referring to a work by Orestes Palermos and Duncan Pritchard here in Edinburgh, and their account on the epistemic group agent. I provide this name to their approach that try to combine group knowledge with virtue epistemology. And the segment of virtue epistemology that is at work here is the one that were developed by Duncan in 2010, and the idea that the cognitive ability weak account. So as all of you already know, the idea that the knowledge derives from the cognitive ability of the cognitive agents, but not entirely. There is the dependence by the environment. And for my account of dialogical inquiry, this dependence by the environment is very important, because it is exactly what permits the production of this group knowledge and this arising of new skills also in the subjective level. So about this account, there were some criticisms, and exactly here by Andy Clark with this article, What Extent It Me Knows. And I introduced this criticism because it underlines that in this account of the epistemics group agents, he said that there is a level of awareness and decision making too high to permit this extension. Because he explained that in order to have this extension, and you can see the point 3, we don't need to be so aware of the skills that are extended. And more we consciously recognize something as an external resource or tool, less it works as an integrated component of the extended system. So I think that this criticism is important for me, because it shows that there are at play also the unconscious level of affectivity that then we were speaking about. So this has to do with another side of my research. But exactly about this topic of dialogical inquiry as an educational practice that we deliberately choose to do with an educational aim, etc., I think, on the contrary, that we have to stress the account provided by Duncan and Orestes, and I can say that to take the bulls by the horns and stress even more the responsibility account, the decision making, etc. And in order to do it, I propose to combine their approach with the research that are nowadays conducted in collective intentionality and group knowledge, and especially by the model proposed by Margaret Gilbert, so about the joint commitment account and the joint task and the responsibility towards this task. And of course, in my topic, this task is to produce knowledge together, okay? So I propose, as I have already told you, to combine the approach by Duncan and Orestes with the Gilbert one, and thus I depict the group knowledge as sharing a joint task and being committed to it. This is very important, so being committed to it. We deliberately choose to perform this dialogical inquiry together. Each agent performs a different and specific action depending from his cognitive ability. This has to do with the distributive cognition account, and offer it for the benefit of the whole, and offer it for the benefit of the group of knowledge. And for dialogical inquiry, we can say sharing a joint commitment for knowledge, and this is a necessary condition for me. So to have this joint commitment for know together, we converse using different skills that each member would offer to achieve the common goal, which would arise as distributed group knowledge. As maybe you already know, Margaret Gilbert has developed also a collective emotion account regarding the joint commitment account. And so you can read the first quotation: person X and Y and so on are collectively E if and only if they are jointly committed to be E as a body. And if we replace E as excited, for example, it becomes person X and Y and so on are collectively excited if and only if they are jointly committed to be excited as a body. Okay, so I have a bit of criticism about this, because I think that one is fine regarding collective agency, but is not so comprehensive about affectivity, because Chu understood excitement in this way only as something that we can work towards, so about the cognitive aspect of excitement. But as everyone I think can recognize, excitement is also something that arises spontaneously, right? So something that has to do with this side of unconscious state that I mentioned regarding by Clark criticism. And thus, I try to rephrase this account in this way, starting in 3 with folk psychology, and so very naively say, we are jointly committed to do something together, and thus, we are excited as a body. Okay, this I think that is something very common to say. We are doing this stuff together, and then we are excited to do this together. Okay. And exactly here, I use what I say before the distributed cognition account, and so I rephrase the question in this way. I read immediately the 5th point. We are jointly committed to acquire knowledge together. Thus, we decide to take part of a dialogical inquiry in which our affective and cognitive abilities are distributed in order to attain the task of our epistemic group. So this is a rephrase from Duncan and Orestes' account, adding the affective abilities. So now we have to go into affective ability. This was the background, so I hope to have provided you an overview of this. So for affective ability, I mean those emotional capacities at work in the learning processes that, depending from their specificity, enable some kinds of cognitive processes and involve message acts. So in this definition, for me, today is important to stress the idea that they are enabling, so what enable some kinds of cognitive processes. So my idea is that affective ability is not a sufficient condition, okay, but is something that enable the arising of some cognitive state or intellectual virtues, maybe. I would like to discuss this with you. So as something that is in the ground of the group knowledge, and that, if well trained, help to perform some cognitive states. And specifically about dialogical inquiry, I detected this sixth point that can depict affective ability. So the list is not exhaustive. I mean, the starting point of this research. So I start with this, but I guess that there are also more. But we start with this. So the first point, affective ability motivate the cognitive process. This has to do with the definition of emotion as motives for action, okay? So something, the power that leads us to do something, and this something in this way is to know together through a dialogical inquiry. So affective ability as motivation. Second point, make the topic more salient to the group, grasping its value. So how is possible that affective ability make the topic more salient? Because affective ability disclose the value of the topic. This has to do with Peter Goldie's definition of emotion, emotion as disclosing value. So third point, experience the depth and understand the cognitive failures as a stimulus to continue the research. So I think that this point is not so obvious as the first two. And my third example will go deep exactly into it. So I will not discuss it now because we will have a section about this. Then the fourth point, fortify the confidence among the members of the groups, building the togetherness of the we thinking. I think that this point could be helpful to clear this idea of enabling condition. So in this way, the affective ability build the emotional environment of the research, and so fortify, if it is an ability, of course, it can help to fortify the confidence among the interlocutors, among the speakers, and so to be free to express their thinking, etc., etc. And also the togetherness of the group, to be responsible towards the group, because I recognize that the group is something that I belong to, that is me in some way, and that I'm an important part of it. And connected to the third point, there is the fifth point, that is trust the other's testimony. I know that this point could be problematic, but if we take dialogical inquiry as a way of knowledge together, presupposition is to trust what the other say to me, to take it as a starting point for the reasoning and build together our knowledge. And so the sixth point is fulfill the recognition of others' commitment to the common research, enhancing their responsibility for the collective. And this has exactly to do with Gilbert's approach. So to stress this joint commitment towards the common research. So one idea that is at the ground of this notion of affective ability is that feeling and thinking may go together if we well train the affective ability. So here I quote Jan Slavy that is working too on extended cognition and extended emotion to understand affective ability as a tool for feeling and thinking together. For me, it's very important to stress about this model that participating to a group inquiry help the subject to be not only affected by the other, but to strengthen through the relationship with others her or his affective and cognitive ability. So in this way, I understand the social extension as something that maximizes my own ability. What is important for me in this distributive account is that the subject has a very important role. It's not only the group, the subject, the group knowledge, but that the knowledge of the subject is maximized through the participation to a common research. And so what I told you about the combination of distributed cognition and joint cognition account, I would stress the affective and the epistemic group agents. So adding this idea of affective ability. Then this has to do with the enabling condition. There are some empirical studies that show that positive affectivity, this is a notion that comes from psychology, so the capacity to experience positive emotion. So these experimental studies show that the positive affectivity helps collaboration and problem solving in group. Here you have a review of these studies. But this is important to stress that when I'm speaking about affective ability, I have in mind also this idea of a positive affectivity that can help this kind of knowledge. And thus, since I'm speaking of group knowledge, I propose this notion of positive we affectivity. So how can we experience together a positive affectivity as epistemic? So this has to do also with the trust, reliance. So this has more to do about the extended cognition hypothesis. What I wanted to show here is that some of the characteristics that are required to a system to be recognized as extended could be recognized also in this model if we understand the trust and the reliance for the other, so for the other subject that is here with me conversing together. And also the accessibility requirement could be understood as to be accessible to the other, so to give to the other my time, the space to speak with me, to be here, listening, etc. There is the question of efficacy in task that I think that is a challenge for dialogical inquiry, because in some way, if we perceive a too high level of efficacy in task, this may be a way that block our common research. So to say, okay, we are fine. Our first resolution of the problem is fine. Don't continue to discuss together. So this requirement maybe is not so good for our model. And this has to do with the third example that we will discuss later. So we will come back to it soon. Okay, this is the bigger question that maybe some of you have already asked himself, herself. Is affectivity reliable? Because if I say that affective ability is a tool for knowledge, and I'm taking this within the virtue epistemology background, we have to understand if this tool is reliable. And of course, it is unfair to affirm that affectivity will be always a reliable tool for thinking. If we think of our philosophy tradition, the philosopher before us say mostly not, is not reliable. We have to overcome affectivity and reach pure reason. But of course, there are also other traditions that say, no, it's very important, thinking of feminist philosophy, phenomenology, etc. But I don't want to discuss this with you today. I would only to stress that, in my view, it is necessary to recognize first that affectivity has an impact in the process. So we cannot deny that affectivity is at work in this process, first. And since it's there, it has a role in determining its success or failure. And then investigate the conditions that make this difference. So try to understand in which cases affectivity may be a value instead of a virtue. And thus, with affective ability, I'm not referring to affectivity as a broad and indiscriminate container of any kind of affective states, but to the virtuous side of affectivity. And which is the virtuous side of affectivity? The one that produces specific affective abilities as epistemic virtues, as enabling conditions that help to produce these abilities. And thus, the question becomes, which are the affective abilities that positively impact our thinking? And more in details for my topic, which are the affective abilities that positively impact our group knowledge in dialogical inquiry and became our group affective abilities? Okay, so for reply to this question, I choose to provide 3 examples. So not continue this discussion in a very theoretical way, but try to understand, to make arise this question, the answers from the example. So as I already introduced you, my example arises from Socratic dialogue. And okay, as introduction, I can say that in Socratic dialogue we can detect curiosity, inquisitiveness, wonder, intellectual courage, grit, and perseverance as emotional experience that are at work in this in any philosophical inquiry. So we can speak about cognitive emotions or epistemic emotion as love of truth or respect for good arguments, also as a part of a desirable epistemic character. But also the same meaning of philosophia as love for wisdom has to do with this connection between affectivity and knowledge. So if we understand Socratic dialogue as a philosophical practice with an educative goal, as I have already told you, emotion may be understood as motivational states distributed in the group knowledge, but also as a power that builds the character of the epistemic agent, enhancing her abilities and responsibility in the learning process. And so this has again to do with the meaning of love of learning as the basis for intellectual virtues, and in this way affectivity as the ground of these virtues. So the example. The first one has to do with the nature of questions. So in Socratic dialogue, the starting point of the discussion are questions that arise from daily experience. So are not theoretical questions, but are questions that arise exactly from an example of daily life. So the idea is that a participant proposes a personal experience prompting a philosophical question. And this is suggested to the group. And the group before providing answer, is asking to provide other examples. So there is a collection of example, phenomenological investigation, that make this arising of question. In my experience, as I have already told you this morning, I'm also a facilitator of this kind of practice. This moment is very important because there is the starting point of the inquiry as effervescence. There is the excitement of generating more and more questions that are moved not only by intellectual curiosity, but also by existential doubts. As I can really say that it's a strenuous battle for a deeper understanding. If I pose a question that arises from my experience, it's not just to say, okay, I'm curious about this, I would like to understand better, but because it's something that is ruminating inside myself, that creates doubts, something that is not clear. So I need to investigate it with others. And thus I think that this has to do with the philosophical meaning of wonder. So wonder as the source of questioning. You know, curiosity often is defined as the starting point of every investigation. I agree with this, but I really would like to stress not only curiosity, but wonder. And of course, here I can show you two exemplars from ancient philosophy, and Plato and Aristotle. I don't want to read all the quotation, but just to underline the idea that I'm lost in wonder. So this is something that also is a strong feeling, and exactly this feeling is what defines you as a philosopher, since wonder is the only beginning of philosophy, so the starting point. But also in the Aristotelian account, you see that there is this combination of curiosity and perplexity. So wonder as this very complex affective state. It's not just a positive state. Okay, I'm curious about this and I want to know something better. And thus, if this is the starting point, I think that, of course, the capacity of questioning is a key component of critical thinking. Dialogical inquiry is one of the best examples of collective critical thinking. And in the German tradition, there is this nice idea, I think, that I think with one another. The German word is mit einander denken. So denken is a thinking, mit einander, me and you together. So there are the two components. It's not only the group, not by myself, but think with one another. And if we agree, you agree with me that wonder is a more complex affective state, I can also say that the goal of wonder in this way is something that is deeper than knowledge as collection of information, but has to do with understanding. So it has also to do with an existential aim. And this is very important for Socratic dialogue, because Socratic dialogue is not a problem solving. It's not just the idea, okay, we have this question, we discuss together, and we will we will reach an answer. Okay, fine. No, very, very often what appears is a more complex image of the reality, where many questions still remain without answer. And someone can say, so this is a failure. It's not knowledge. Why I have to pursue this kind of dialogical inquiry? I think that this has a very educative virtue as the capacity to do not accept the first answer that I reach. So also to not having universal answer for everything. So as to do with the civic virtues of skepticism. And okay, we cannot discuss this in detail now, but as you know in the story, from Socrates, from this Socrates experience, we had also the school of skepticism. So exactly from Socrates grew this idea of philosophy as continuous battle within the question, and our aim is to try to train ourselves to live with the question, so to live with the problem, if we would translate this as problem solving. So I think that what we get from this example is for the motivational power of emotions, and also the idea that is always an embodied cognition, because it arises from daily life experience, and also because it has this existential aim and doubt. So the second example has to do with the historical figure of Minna Specht. Minna Specht is this woman in the picture. She is one of the pioneers of the German method, and she developed a school, the Walkemühle, during the Nazi period, and then after the Second World War, a new school, the Odenwald School. Her experience is very interesting for me, because in this school that were called School of Life in Germany, she chose Socratic dialogue as the method of education. And not only, she chose to accept in her school both German and Jewish pupils together. And of course, I think that you can imagine what happened. So she had to emigrate with the school to the Netherlands first, and then to the UK. But her aim was to continue this kind of education. So in her account, dialogue was an experience of equality and freedom of thinking, so as to do exactly with this idea of critical thinking as a way to emancipate ourselves from the totalitarian one thinking. And also, our account is not democratic. This comes from Nelson, that Nelson is the founder of the method. But for her, was important a real shared participation. So during this kind of dialogue, they were struggling for a knowledge that were good for everyone. But that doesn't mean just a single answer, but first of all, understanding the reasons of the other. And yes, she defined her method as education for confidence. That's why I think that is a good example for my approach, how to educate to confidence and trust to the other. And remember, the other were for the German children, the Jewish children, and the opposite. So something very, very powerful. And the tools for doing this was a trust for reason. So this is important for me, because I really don't want to make you thinking that stressing the affective ability, I'm denying here the role of reasoning or reason. No, there is this powerful combination, I can say, that is detectable in this method developed by Minna. And in her method, I think we have diary from her method. She wasn't someone that we can depict a philosopher building theory, etc. We have diaries where she told the daily life at the school, what she was looking for. She was more an educator, right? And so it's very vivid, the description of her her desire to create a friendly environment, to create the right environment for education. So this has to do with what I said before about positive affectivity. So create the positive affective environment as enabling condition that permits to produce a distributed affective ability of the group. And I think that in this way, affectivity is not only an accessory tools of the environment, but as an inner power, the capacity of as a transformative power, exactly in her educative aim of building the character of the students that participate to this kind of collective inquiry. And this has to do with, are not her words, but I try to understand her experience as ethics and politics of care. So has to do with this book by Fiona McKay. Okay, this is something that I have already told you. So this Socratic dialogue is very specific and has to do with this idea of building the reliability of testimony in the interpersonal and dialogical distributed processes among Jewish and German children. And this example also opened this inquiry to political goal. And so the question may be, in which sense can a dialogical education be considered as a political action? And so here we have two answers that came exactly from her life. So has to do with the creation of this school exactly in this period, but also about her commitment of elaborating a model of education for those children that had experienced the Second World War. So she worked for the UNESCO until the 59. But also has to do with more philosophical question. Of course, this question hasn't been asked by her, but by Hans Jonas. How is possible to think God after Auschwitz? And this, I think, that can be rephrased in educational terms, how to educate after totalitarianism, how to regain trust in reason after the horror of the Second World War. You remember that I say that reason was the first tool for this education, the trust for reason for this method. So I think that this question has to do with the notion of limits of reasoning. And as Hans Jonas replied to the first question, that we cannot understood anymore God as omnipotent, thus we can say that we cannot anymore understand the reasoning as omnipotent. But here you can say, oh, so we miss true, etc., etc. So I think that the experience of Socratic dialogue has to do with the idea of objectivity that is something that is constructed together. So it's a constructivism approach, a social process, and also relational. So it has to do with the truth that we build together, me and you. And again, how to educate in this situation of the limits of reasoning, the answer for me is the establishment of the positive environment. So to create this enabling condition that can permit the arising of the intellectual virtue. So the second example told us about positive affectivity as the ground for the trustfulness and confidence towards other testimony. And this is the historical part. Okay, the third example, because I have only 5 minutes, so it has to do with aporetic states. And I chose this last example because it may be a challenge to my claim about positive affectivity, because I'm still thinking, okay, the friendly environment, etc., etc. But if you know Socratic dialogue, you know that Socrates always try to question the interlocutors and bring them to a break of the toes, to a door that you cannot open. So the aporia, exactly. This radical impossibility of thought, I can say. Nevertheless, I think that aporetic states are not a challenge to my question, because exactly the friendly environment as enabling condition is what permits also what we say negative cognitive states or negative emotional states to not be disrupted, to not be bad for the process. But if the interlocutors are doing a research together, they may arise also the capacity to accept that another show my mistake, show that I'm doing something wrong, that my reasoning is not good. And this has to do with an idea that is very deep in the ancient Socratic dialogue. So the idea of dialogue as a refutation, to show the limits of the other through the power of shame. And here, really, I should speak more, but I can. But in this notion, shame is a virtue, because in the Greek, there is, and from refutation learns modesty, is aiskine, the Greek word, and is a virtue for the Greek. Is the recognition of our limits, is the recognition that we don't know everything, and thus, thanks to the other, we can cooperate to overcome our limits and reach a new level of knowledge. So I can say that if we build the right positive environment, also this kind of states that could looks as a challenge to my claim, make them functional for the process. So the friendly environment supports these states because it builds a non-judgmental and egalitarian environment. So I propose this new notion of lovely shame as intellectual humility. Okay, so the idea of modesty, maybe the translation as modesty make more understandable this idea, but the necessity to recognize also in this existential way of purification that I lack something, and so thanks to you I can become better. And so here in this model there is the idea of empathizing with the intellectual suffering of the other. So if I pursue a criticism toward the other, it's not because I'm bad, I want to show my potency against the other, but because I understand that he needs my help to overcome this illness of reasoning, is said by Plato. Okay? So from this third example, we get the idea that the friendly environment permits negative emotions associated to aporetic states to be functional for the inquiry. Okay, here you have just a sum up, but I think that I don't need to do it. I just leave the slide here so you can read it and we can start with the discussion. Thank you.